wonderful young Christian couple got married and decided to have children right away. Well, at least to start trying to have children right away, because of course, nature has something to do with that process. And after a few months, she still wasn't pregnant. After about 6 months, they talked to their doctor, who said, well, 6 months might be a little bit unusual, but nothing to worry about. By about the 1 year mark, it was time to have some examinations because there might be something going on. Well, it turned out the problem wasn't that there was something going on. The problem was that there was something not going on. This young Christian couple was not having sex. They literally were not having sex. They had not yet had penis and vagina ejaculation sex. So, kind of no longer a mystery as to why she wasn't pregnant, because the things that lead to pregnancy had not been occurring, or what I will sometimes euphemistically call baby making behavior. And baby making behavior often results in babies, but a lack of baby making behavior generally doesn't result in a lot of babies. But this married couple had gotten a year into their marriage without even knowing what sex was, and not knowing that they weren't doing it. Now, on one hand, if you have zero reference and you have no idea what sex is, and you're going to tell a couple, okay, what you need to do is, okay, the thing that he pees out of goes into the place that she bleeds out of. And you're going to do that on purpose. Well, that kind of sounds disgusting. And if you have zero reference point, that may not, bizarrely enough, occur to people completely on their own. Now, that sounds like that was an extreme case. I mean, why didn't someone at least have that much of a conversation with them? But then I was also talking to a married woman, and in her case, she had a very rich and full sex life with her husband. But she said when she got married, though, that her mother and her grandmother gave her lingerie. And that was her entire sex education at home. Now, in her particular case, she'd been exposed to sex education through the school system and such. So she had some idea what was going on and what all this was about. But as far as actual family, the women in the family who obviously had sex because they had her and they had mom, so they knew what sex was, and they had zero conversation about, zero real talk. Now, look around society these days. You can hardly watch a comedian without some jokes being about sex. You can hardly watch any comedy, even televised comedy, without something alluding to sex, directly or by innuendo. So we have a society that jokes around sex, has comedy around sex, talks about sex in vague terms, has all of these euphemisms that we use to mention sex and sexual body parts without actually saying the words. And yet, we so rarely have real discussions. As a counselor, a coach, and a pastor, I cannot even tell you how many times I've had people in my office, and around the realm of sex, I will often suggest a conversation, because one of the questions I'll sometimes ask is, so what's the plan for pregnancies? Oh, well, we're not going to get pregnant. So, okay, well, what's the plan that you're using to avoid pregnancy? And then if pregnancy does occur, what's the plan? And very often I'm talking to the young lady, well, obviously I would keep the baby, and say, okay, and so now does he know that's the plan? Well, I don't want a big confrontation. So I didn't say anything about the confrontation. I said, have a conversation, just talk. It's like, oh, well, I just don't think that I can. And I said, well, let me see if I get this straight. You're saying that you think you're intimate enough to be having sex, but you're not intimate enough to talk about sex. And very often there's, some version of like, well, you make it sound stupid when you say it that way, kind of unpacked after that. But it really is a problem that we just don't have real conversations around sex. When I was a young single Christian man, we had some books like, okay, here's a book called Intended for Pleasure. And the idea of this book is sex technique and sexual fulfillment in Christian marriage. Now, this particular one is the revised, updated, and expanded version. I went actually looking to see if there was a new version. I couldn't find one. Back at Skyline Church in the old days, Jim Garlow did a series that was kind of a PG-13 series talking about sex. And he was probably about as blunt as you could reasonably be in a big church that was pretty conservative, where you have men, women, and children all in the room having this conversation. And he would warn, if your kids are below the age of 13, if you don't want to have the talk with them yet, you might want to not bring them to these services. And even then, he had talks about the relationship around sex, about the importance of sex in a marriage relationship, about the importance of a healthy relationship and a healthy sex life. But of course, he's not being blunt, he's not being graphic, but he is at least talking about the subject, which was, at least for me, refreshing. To have a real conversation going on. It may not have been a very detailed conversation, but at least those open the door to the topic. So there was some possibility of having a conversation. Now, one of the classic books on the subject, and I don't even know that this was picked up as a used book for, what is this, $7.95, called the Joy of Sex. And this goes into, well, I guess this was the new Joy of Sex. What is the copyright in this one? I didn't even look before I started. Going back, there we go. Copyright 1972, and this is a 1991 edition. So there's been material around to have real discussions. Now, I haven't read all of this in detail, but it's the Gourmet Guide to Lovemaking for the 90s. And I imagine now a lot of this would probably seem pretty dated by today's standards, but material is available. Now, in particular, material is available in such a way that you can have real conversations. You could take a book like that and go through it as a couple, go through it as lovers, have real discussions about it. Because here's one of the things: if sex is part of a relationship, and I'll often talk about the idea of a swim, awesome sex when I'm married, that you need to be able to communicate about this subject. Now, what gets to be interesting, so I have this other book here called The Vagina Bible. Now, this was recommended to me by a sex educator, because one of the things, I have several relationships where I can have honest conversations about sex. One of the curious things about some of this stuff is there's a lot of things women just don't know about their own bodies and about how it works and why it works that way and what's going on with it. And there's a bunch of opinions and old wives' tales, I guess you could call them. And so I asked the sex educator, is there a reference book, a book that you would suggest about things about the woman's body and sex response that by and large a lot of women just don't know? Because if they don't know, they can't tell me. And this was one of the books that she recommended. And so I read this book. I have a 13-page book report on it. If anybody would like a copy of that, just message me and let me know, and I'll give you a copy of the book report on that. But it's learning a lot of things. And the biggest general theme out of this book that I got was that there's a whole range of stuff that is just normal. Normal appearances of things, normal smells of things, normal reactions of things. There's this whole thing that is within the healthy middle of the bell curve that a lot of people have anxiety over because they just don't know how normal it is. And one of the problems you run into, not just with women's sexuality, men's sexuality, is if you go to Google things about sex because you want to learn what sex is and learn how sex works, what are you likely to find online? You're likely to find pornography. And pornography is not real life. In fact, one of the metaphors, if you're going to go to the high wire work, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, Matrix, all of these kind of action movies, all the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and you're going to watch those fights and think, oh, that's what real martial arts is like. So if I go training karate, that's what I'm going to learn how to do. And no, it isn't. That there's show arts, there's stuff that you do for show, and performance art is different than the real thing. And now, admittedly, I am by no means an expert on pornography. I remember some ages ago seeing a little radio button on a page that said the top 100,000 pornography sites. Now, I didn't go looking at these top 100,000 pornography sites, but I sat there marveling at the fact that however long ago this was 10, 20 years ago, that not only were there over 100,000 pornography sites, they were a top 100,000 pornography sites. Well, what that means is when people that we know or ourselves or our children as they grow up go looking for information, there will be a ton of information. Most of it probably pornography. And that is not where we want our kids to be learning about sex from. One of the exercises I gave a mother of multiple boys one time is to go home and using only words your 8-year-old would know. See what you find. Like if your 8-year-old would know the word boob, use boob. If your 8-year-old would know the word butt, use butt. Just to see what they might run into. And as your assignment is just 15 minutes. I'm not asking you to go hunting down like you're looking for stuff. I'm asking you to just go see what you run into. Now, her initial thing is, well, like, don't you need like a credit card to get into those sites? And, my kids don't have access to credit cards. So, yeah, just see what you find for free. Just go look. And she came back to me and says, like, I only lasted 5 minutes. I had no idea. And that's just using third grade vocabulary. You do boobs, you do butts. Now, also speaking of third grade, when I was married, had a third grade stepson. He came home one day to let us know that his friend showed him pictures of naked ladies at school. And the big challenge is, because we'd already had some of the sex talk at an appropriate level for someone his age, so that we could have these conversations. And what it turned out happened is there was one particular search engine at the time that the filters couldn't pick up on because it didn't bring the picture from the site in a thumbnail form. It opened an open window so you could see what was on the page. And that meant all the filter saw was all these blank open windows that didn't see thumbnails. So if you didn't go to the actual site, the filter didn't know what you were looking at. And this one fellow third grader figured that out. Now, probably, I suspect, found out about it from an older sibling or somebody else, but was so proud of himself. He figured his way around the filter. He was showing his friends, and my stepson was one of those friends. So we thought the principal should know. Now, we were neither particularly shocked, nor were we even particularly angry. It became a teachable moment for the stepson, and we had a good conversation about it. And we thanked him for coming to talk to us. We treated it like, these are the things that happen when people are more interested in women for looking at them and ogling them than they are in them as people. And of course, we trust that you understand that, any pictures you saw of anyone, those are real people. And they're real human beings who have thoughts and feelings, and they're important people. And so it was a good conversation. And so more and more, we need to have these conversations younger and younger because of where people are getting their information. They're not reading the Song of Solomon and getting all of the poetic talk that is packed in there. And by the way, if you don't think the Bible talks about romantic sex, read the Song of Solomon. And you'll kind of see like, okay, there's some pretty saucy stuff going on in there. And a lot of the old idioms of the ways that they would talk about a woman's body and a woman's breasts and a woman's neck and all of that is using different idioms, of course. But the idea is the same, that there was desire and there was passion and there was a craving and a hunger for fulfillment. And so when you begin to start looking into these things, even just biblically, okay, it has been a thing for a long time. And it's something that God talks about. But even then, he's not pornographic in how bluntly he talks about it, so that his word can go into all of these different countries and cultures down through the ages. But it talks about it. And when you begin to consider all the way back to the beginning, you have Adam, you have Eve, biologically engineered to produce offspring through sexual intercourse. Biologically engineered, because if you believe God created Adam and Eve and he made the male and female and he said, be fruitful and multiply, that there's some sex going on there. And there's some curious parts going on about that. I'm going to show you a couple of more books that are relevant to the thing. This one, Come As You Are. This was another one that was recommended to me by the sex educator. And the basic theme of this one is aimed for women is just show up, be yourself, relax. There's a whole range of normal. There's a whole range of normal behaviors, a whole range of normal bodies. There's a whole range of normal desires. Just relax. Because sometimes the message that we give our young ladies is so paradoxical. And they get all these snippets of things from all over the place. And then we're not even just talking about getting from porn, you get romance novels, the messages they get at church. I watched a pastor's wife getting on a young lady one time because she was wearing low-cut jeans, which I'm not around youth culture these days, so I don't know what's popular right here, right now. But at the time, that's what everyone was wearing. In fact, if you wanted to get the higher cut jeans, especially like, 60s, 70s style, the high-waisted jeans, those simply were not available. It was just, how low cut are the low cut jeans? I mean, at least that's all I ever saw in the stores back then. And this older pastor's wife that was older than me, so she's definitely from a different generation. She's like halfway between me and my mother, is telling me, well, you shouldn't dress like that because then you'll never be able to get a good man, and you have to make sure you never let a man, you never surrender your virginity. That's the most precious gift God gave you, because if you do, you'll never get a good man. And really, Cassie, in this conversation, as though a woman's value was defined by her sexual status. If she was a virgin, she had high value. If she was not a virgin, no good man should be interested in a woman who is not a virgin. And these are the kinds of conversations going on around churches. At same and other related churches, because it's part of a network of churches, they would have these weekend camps. And the short version of the camps is the girls would be in their section, the boys would be in their section. The theme was around virginity, but really all they told anyone about sex was, don't do it, it's a sin, it makes God sad. And essentially it boiled down to a question of, so how many of you will pledge to wait until you're married to have sex and not make God sad, and to preserve your virginity so that you can marry a good person? Well, you don't know anything about what this thing is that you're pledging. And it's done in public, in front of everybody, in front of your moms, in front of your dads. What else are you going to say? And you're pledging to not do this thing you don't know anything about. And if you're the girls, it's to not let a boy do this thing, that whatever this is, boys want to do it, so it's bad. and boys are bad and they're icky and ew, and yeah, I'll do this whole a purity ceremony, and my dad will give me a purity ring, and I'll pledge my virginity to my father, and so then it's my father's right to give me away to my husband, and then that's when I get the ring from my husband, and that means I have sex with my husband. And sometimes for the people who do those, it seems like it's a beautiful way to preserve the purity of their daughters and the purity of their sons. And to a lot of other people, it seems weird and manipulative because you're not having real conversations. You're not even telling them what it is. You're not even really warning them that it feels good. So Christian counseling, one young lady was a peer counselor at college age, and she came to me with a problem because she was counseling this young college woman, this Christian who was talking about wanting to have sex with a boyfriend, and her counseling was very simple. Well, you just have to not let him do that to you. And the woman said, no, he's not trying to pressure me into anything that I want to. It's like, yeah, you just don't let him pressure you. It's like, no, I just told you he's not pressuring me, and I want to. It's like, well, you just can't let him do that to you. And he's like, okay, whatever, we're done. Because what this Christian counselor girl couldn't understand is why would anyone want to do that? So she came and was talking to me about it. And I'm going, okay, I see where your problem is. You have this idea in your head because, you're a good Christian girl, we'll put that in quotes, who doesn't really have any sexual desire. And that you've always been taught since the first time the subject came up that this is a dirty thing that boys try to pressure unwilling women into. And this is a sacrifice that a wife makes for her husband because now we're married. I have to allow him to do this disgusting, icky, dirty thing. And she sat there and realized, yeah, actually, I guess, yeah. That's not it. Like, that might be it for some percentage of women, but no, not for most. Now, here's one of the curious things of where so much of this came from. Now, I have an entire program called Awesome Sex, and it's been pulled out as a separate relationship-oriented program. The focus on it being ASWIM, Awesome Sex When I'm Married. So it's focused on married couples. More and more over the years, I've kind of relaxed my approach to the issue and how I talk about it, married or not married. But regardless, I'm going to use that series at the end of these live talks or these more recently recorded talks to make that material available to everyone who's here for Quest Xian. But on the subject of sex in general, the curious thing that had occurred is I was doing a submission lesson. Now, if you've been part of Quest Xian for any meaningful length of time, you know about my 8 gates of submission. And if you've been through my pre-marriage counseling or you've heard my matrimonial messages, you know that to me, the obey vow as part of the wedding vows is a standard part of me doing marriages, and that she promises to love, honor, and obey, and he promises to love, honor, cherish. Now, one of the things you get often from Ephesians 5:22 is this idea of wives submit to your husbands, and that's part of where we get that from. You drop down a little bit further, it says husbands love your wives as Christ loved the church. And one of the submission questions is, would you be obedient to love? Would you submit yourself to being loved as Christ loved the church? Would you submit to Christ lightening your burden? Would you submit to Christ giving you rest? Or are you going to be like Martha and have to work? And say, oh, she's resting. She shouldn't be allowed to rest. She needs to get up and work. Like I'm work. And Jesus said, Martha, 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 you were worried about so many things. Mary is relaxing. She is doing something important, and she is here with me. Part of the message is being, Martha, chill, relax. So would you submit to that? Would you submit to your burden being lightened? Would you submit to your yoke being lightened, to have a partnership that lightens your load and makes life easy? And if you go down to lower down in Ephesians, you get, okay, so basically, would you submit, wife, to your husband loving you as Christ loved the church? And a whole bunch of women will say some version of, well, yeah, well, if that's what I'm being asked to submit to, yeah. But we still have this idea that, man boss, woman subservient, servant at home. But if you go one verse up, Ephesians 5:21, submit one to another. Now you have a problem. So if you and I are in this mutual submission relationship, how do you submit to me? And at the exact same time, I submit to you, if submit is one of us is the boss and the submitter is the servant. Because if you're the boss and I'm supposed to do what you say, and at exactly the same time, I'm the boss and you're supposed to do what I, how does that work? But if submission is going along with a good idea, submission is going along with a good thing, well, now we can submit one to another. Here's part of what commonly happens. Someone goes like, oh, wait, I have an idea. Stapler. I said, stapler? No. Throw the stapler away. Here's my idea. Tape. And you go, no. Throw that away. I said stapler. And now you're arguing between the stapler and the tape. Now, what submit one to another goes, staples. Well, that's a good idea. Now, I was thinking tape. And since it's tape, that's a good idea too. For this particular thing we're trying to connect, what would be better, stapling them together or tape? And so I conclude, well, the tape might not hold. That's why I want to staple them. And so I said, well, the problem with the staple is then the staples poke at the bottom. So I said, oh, well, what if we stapled them and we put tape over the pokey part of the staples? So I was, well, that could work. And someone says, oh, hey, I've got an idea. In fact, what if we did a little hammer and we staple it and we just tap down the end of the staple, so now it's smooth, and then we put the tape over them, so now it's smooth and it's protected. So, and we call that synergy, when you start stacking ideas where the ideas come together and they start to solve the problem. And that's submitting one to another. I don't need to throw your idea off the table to present mine. I go along with your good idea. You go along with my good idea. Now we have two good ideas. And from those two good ideas, sometimes we can build a better third idea. Or sometimes we start adding a third or a fourth or a fifth. And we start to have this idea flow of brainstorming, and then genius happens when we submit one to another, when we go along with good ideas rather than oppose good ideas. And when you take that in context of submit one to another and wives submit to your husbands, you could almost look at that like, okay, so all of you Christians, just go along with each other's good ideas. And wives, go along with your husband's good ideas. This is you too, even you. And even if it's your husband's idea, just go along with his good ideas. And husbands, just love her. So I had the whole then related 8 gates of submission, where just go along unless it's not a good idea. And the part of it is there a reason to delay? Meaning that I don't think I should do that yet. A big reason might be, I'm not sure I understand exactly what it is you're saying that you want to hear. Or should I disobey that? Like, okay, I think I understand, and no, not doing that because I believe I have a good reason. I don't think that's a good idea. Or if other people are involved, to belay, meaning to hold off on that, or countermand, meaning don't do that, do this instead. And then in dealing with the leader as an individual, is there a reason to remove the leader from leadership, either in part, meaning, okay, generally they do fine, but okay, right here, either they don't think clearly on this issue, or they don't know anything about it. They have opinions, they just don't have knowledge. Like, or in whole, that okay, they just not making good leadership decisions. And temporarily and it could be they're not making good leadership decisions because like they're drunk, and that'd be temporary. When they're sober, they're great. When they're drunk, no, just don't do anything with them. Or permanently, which just means that they just no, not ever. And those combine to make four squares. So I had that whole thing. So, and I'm also a martial arts master. So a woman came to me one time and asked me a question, and asked if I could teach her boyfriend how to choke her without hurting her. Now, the answer is, of course, yes, but it did lead to an interesting question. Like, yes, but I'm curious as to why. And yeah, her short version is like, well, we're into a dom sub relationship, and I'm the submissive, and so I'd like to be choked during sex, but he keeps hurting me, and I would like him to. I like the feeling of being choked during sex. I just don't want to get injured in the process. You know, okay. And so thus was I introduced to the BDSM world. But now, admittedly, there's a lot of hardcore stuff out there. Now, this book was more my speed. It's called The Loving Dominant. And so I thought this was a level of introduction to the community that I was comfortable with. But the short version of the idea is that the dominant's job is to create an experience for the sub, the submissive. And here's a couple of key things. The real power rests with the submitted, because the submitted has the on-off switch. So there's this thing a lot of us have heard of called a safe word. And if that safe word gets used, that turns off the experience, period, done, we're done. And you have to honor that. Now, for me in martial arts, that's a lot like tapping out of a grappling match. When the person submits, when the person taps out and says, we're done, you stop immediately. And if you do not stop, you will not have partners to grapple with. And so there's this rule set around it. But here gets to be the most fascinating thing to me about all of this is when you're into really kinky stuff, and there's a list of things that well, one, even having read this book, there's a whole bunch of stuff in here I still don't really understand quite what it's talking about. And to be perfectly honest, I'm okay with that. But there's a lot of stuff that I follow, and like and choking is one of them. If you like to be choked, well, you have to communicate that. And if you want to be just grayed out, you have to communicate that. If you like hands on your throat, but you don't want it to be squeezed, you need to communicate that. If you want to be handcuffed, the handcuffs is like always the play bondage thing you see she joked around but never really talked about. You need to have conversations about that. If you want to do a thing, just like a writing crop. So you always see like the bodice and the writing crop thing as part of it. Like, okay, well, if you want to be hit, like, well, where do you want to be hit? How much do you want to be hit? Do you want to be marked to bruising? And so when you begin to think of these things, regardless of your opinion about any of it, when you're into the kinky stuff, if you do not have conversations, there's no way to know what someone is and isn't into, what someone does and doesn't like, where someone's lines are, where the hard lines are, where the soft lines are. We're like, well, maybe I get warmed up to that. I would be up for this, or I would really like this, but let's stay away from that. So here gets me one of the interesting things. So when you're part of this community, this BDSM community, you have to have conversations. Well, here gets to be one of the things. If you are in the Christian community, guess what? You need to be having these conversations. You need to be able to talk. But the BDSM people, the kinky people know they need to talk because they know they're doing fringe stuff. But you know what? The what they would call vanilla sex, just you got to have the conversation. Be willing to explore, even if all it is for you is missionary sex. Well, maybe I don't know. We'll see how a couple of times a week works. And if that's going to be the conversation, okay, it's like, well, I like the lights on, I like the lights off, simple, basic stuff. Well, can you talk about it? Can you actually have conversations about it? Are you comfortable talking about it with another couple, with other people? Can you have those conversations? Can you have real conversations about things like, well, how exactly does a condom work? How do you practice putting one on? How do you do this? What are the birth control options? If we don't want to have children right away, what are the options? And here gets to be an interesting thing that I have recently found out I did not know before. The existence of a clitoris, often thought of as just like, practically this pleasure button on a woman's body. But it's an entire organ that loops around inside, and it's much larger than most people ever realized. But the part that I find so interesting is that there does not appear to be any purpose to this organ other than pleasure. And human women seem to be pretty unique in the entire animal kingdom as to who has this pleasure only organ. Men don't have one. Animals don't have them. And part of what that tells me is, okay, so sex is intended to be pleasurable for women. And yet the arc of history would seem to indicate that we haven't really paid a lot of attention to that. And so there's a whole bunch of things related to the subject of not just be willing to talk about it, be willing to learn about it. Like my whole vagina Bible exploration started off talking to the sex therapist. Like, well, is there stuff that women often don't know about the bodies? Now, part of how I found out how much women don't know about the bodies is one of my, dear lady friends who I can have blunt conversations about sex with, said that when she was talking to this same sex educator, that's how I was introduced to her, about a bunch of stuff, it as a conversation unfolded, she goes, "Well, I didn't know that. Okay, look, I've had 2 kids, and I've had years of like, self-exploration. I didn't know that. Oh, didn't know that either." And she, you know what? If I don't know this stuff, there must be a lot of women who don't know this stuff. To which the sex educator said, yes, absolutely true. And so she decided to basically host a class of just female friends, no men invited to this one, that just talked about female bodies and helped the women kind of explore what's what in their own body and the wide range of normal. And this was the book that educator recommended to me. It's like, look, if you were a woman, I would say read this book. In fact, the quote on the book is, "Buy this book if you have a vagina or you spend any time at all in reasonably close proximity to one." Pretty good quote. Because she said, look, you could talk to like 20 women. She says, I don't know how many women you can have real conversations about it with. But unless they are exceptionally knowledgeable, they will not be able to help you very much, because all they can tell you is their own experience. And if they're comfortable enough to be able to have these conversations, they probably really know themselves. Most women don't even know themselves. And so, I mean, look at this. This is 400 pages. But this was a good read. There's a reason why the book report that I did on this is 13 pages long. And if women don't know that about their own body, well, then how can you have a conversation? Same thing with men. If there's stuff as men that we don't know about our own body and our own sexuality, how can we have that conversation? Now, I just turned 56. Just celebrated my birthday. Went down to San Antonio to the Alamo to celebrate my birthday. I will tell you, one of the things about being an older man is that my testosterone levels are a bit lower. And right now, not having a partner, I couldn't really tell you with any certainties, like what would my arousal response be? What would my erection response be? How long would it last? Would there be ejaculations involved? And the answer is, I don't know. I really don't. And how would I find out? Well, here gets me one of the things. Um, I could probably have a pretty good guess that with my 56-year-old body is not going to respond the same way I did when I was 26. I could probably tell you with some certainty that things are not going to get as hard, as fast, stay as long, and last as long, and all of the stuff that was likely true in my 20s and my 30s, just because I'm older. Well, here gets to be a thing. If I had judged my quality as a lover and what quote unquote sex is and what successful sex is, if I think successful sex is get an erection, put in the vagina, ejaculate, done. And now I'm getting older, and the erection is the arousal might be there, but the erection's hit and miss. And that the sex, sometimes it lasts, sometimes maybe it doesn't. The ejaculation, maybe sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. Well, then that means sometimes I'm going to succeed at having sex and sometimes I won't. If that's all it is. Well, here gets to be one of the things as I've been exploring some of these things that gets to be important is, and I've been in this category where I've often thought about like a variety sex life as being largely a matter of positions and places and kind of romantic scenarios. And when I share my awesome sex program in an upcoming series, you'll see that that's a lot of it. A lot of relationship stuff about romantic variety as well as sexual variety. Some details on how to do positions without like creating carpet burns and creating other issues that may arise if you try certain adventures. If you want to have like sex on the beach and sand, the sand gets everywhere. There's some places you really don't ever want to have sand because it creates a problem and it's really, really hard to get out of certain places. So back to the vagina Bible, you do not want those kind of irritants up inside of a woman. And so there's some information in there about like how do you do some of these things without creating those kind of problems. But here's something I didn't spend a lot of time with, which is something I'm looking at a lot more. And this is having a variety of ability to pleasure a woman that has nothing to do with penis and vagina. In particular, to explore more with toys, to explore more with vibrators, to explore more with dildos, to explore more with different sort of things to provide different sorts of sensations so that her pleasure does not depend upon my aging body responding a certain way. And then also talking to a lot of women, and particularly older postmenopausal women, saying that the lubrication response it's all over the place. Some of us go through menopause and our sexuality just awakens, like something inside us says, oh well, I can't get pregnant now, and now suddenly I want to try all of those things that pregnancy always made me hesitant about before. And for some of us it's like the sex desire for sex dries up with the periods, and it's because it's all over the place, we don't know. And some equate lubrication with arousal, and some recognize like, well, no, those are actually two different things. Sometimes you really, really, really want to, you're even aching and hungering for it, just the body's not cooperating. Now that happens in women's bodies. Now with men's bodies, for at least for older men, as soon as we see something and we're really interested, but we're at an age where our body doesn't really respond, that we don't have the erection response that we might have had when we were in our 20s, that we're really aroused, we're really interested, we're really attracted. There's all kinds of sparks going on the inside. It's just we don't have 100% anatomical buy-in. Now, on the woman's side, you have lubrication, and there's a variety of lubrications that are available. And I didn't used to be nearly as pro lubrication until I learned more about that. And I certainly wasn't nearly as pro toy until I learned more about that. But if women have this organ whose sole purpose is pleasure, it would seem to me that this whole sensual, sexual sex experience is meant to be deeply pleasurable, not just meaningful. Although personally, I think if it's meaningful, the way this author calls it, come as you are, is it moves the plot forward. When you think about it, if you see a sex scene in a romantic movie, that it should relate to the story in some way. It moves the plot forward. It moves the relationship forward. It expresses something, which is kind of, in my point of view, is you are expressing your intimacy. You are expressing your connection. But here gets me the interesting thing in the study of the whole, vagina, clitoris, labia, vulva area, is that penis and vagina is a very poor way to stimulate the clitoris. Well, what gets curious is like to me as a guy, I don't remember much, if any, education along the lines of sex being more than you want to get her naked so you can get inside and you can come. Now, I picked it up because to me, the shared pleasure was important to me. But I don't recall it kind of arising organically anywhere. It was information I sought out. And so how many of our young men, and even not so young men, were that's all they really know about sex? But when you begin to think, okay, if women have this entire organ devoted solely to female sensual sexual pleasure, and it is very poorly stimulated by penis and vagina. You go, hmm. If that's true, that this does stimulate it in some women to some degree, but for most women, that's not it. Like 70% of the time, that's not it. That tells me, well, then the expression of relationship and intimacy through sexual expression ought to include a lot more than just different ways of doing intercourse. And the process of getting there ought to include a more three-dimensional, deeper, resonant level of her pleasure, what I might refer to as exploring the outer boundaries of her pleasure. But what could you do? What might you find? Now, for women, for a lot of women, there's a lot of anxiety around all things sexual, and that's part of what this book is. So Vagina Bible was mostly about the medical anatomy stuff, and the Come As You Are is more about the psychological issues related to all of that. And like Intended for Pleasure, that one was more about the kind of an overview of everything with some mechanics. And Joy of Sex seems to be pretty much mechanics. And the Loving Dominant is about the dynamic and a whole bunch of ways to play, most of which I follow, some of which I don't. And there's more, and there's a lot of other related stuff that we could get into. But you start to pull all of this stuff together and go, okay, so the anxiety that women get around sex and sexual stuff, around masturbation, around self-exploration, around the use of toys, is something worth dealing with directly and letting go of, and exploring the totality of sensual pleasure with your wife, your lover, who you should, of course, be loving, to make it a shared pleasurable experience so that you're not dependent upon unreliable body parts always cooperating with you. That's a worthy exploration. And for those of us who are Christians, those of us who believe that God designed the system, God built my body, He built her body, that He crafted this thing called sex, and He gave women this unique organ for pleasure, to honor that design and to seek to make this a powerful experience. Now, one of the things I talk about in the Awesome Sex program is an awesome sex life is not awesome every single time. Just like the best lives still have ups and downs. Overall, it might be awesome. Overall, there might be these incredible highs, but there's still going to be some downs. Likewise, an awesome sex life, sometimes it works for you, it doesn't work for you. Sometimes it'll be quick, sometimes it'll be long. Sometimes it'll be fast and furious, and sometimes it'll be the slow burn. But whatever it is and however it shows up, what I want to be doing here, and you can tell how far afield and how blunt I've been, is to have the real conversations and to promote the real conversations. And as we talk about these things, as these things continue to unfold, to be able to take something, and if you're into, something fairly straightforward, joy of sex, and just go through it, some as a couple, and yet pause at places and talk about stuff. And here gets to be one of the keys across all of the things, is to try your best to not be judgmental. Because this whole book, Come As You Are, if you boil it down, it's you're okay. Stop being so judgmental of yourself if you can, and just accept yourself. And it's the same thing with guys. Just accept yourself. Now, I'll wrap up with this because I think this is important. I kind of don't think men are as interested in sex as they are stereotyped to be, or as their behavior would indicate. I think a lot of men go chasing sex because they don't know what else to do. They don't know how to really connect at a heart level, a soul level. They don't really know how to have these intimate conversations. That all of it, I saw but didn't get a book about the pickup artist world, where the artfulness of the language and the behavior is designed to get laid. Okay, well, that tells you then, so here's a whole category of men who know how to say all the right things. Well, how about say and do all the right things because you actually mean it? Don't kiss her in a way to get her to the next step, to get her to the next step, to get her to the next step so that you can get laid. How about fully express your connection in a lingering hug? Fully express your desire for her in a slow burn kiss? What about expressing your intimacy in a slow dance that doesn't need to land having sex in a bed, but expresses a growing intimacy? How about getting to know her as a human being and being known as a human being, and being open, being honest, being able to have real conversations? And about, before you express your level of intimacy sexually, whatever level of intimacy you might feel that's appropriate for, if you think that's first date, might seem a bit fast to me, but just, think about it. Are you expressing connection and intimacy, or are you just doing a thing and hoping maybe connection and intimacy might come after, or maybe even hoping it doesn't? I don't know. But can you fill in all of the rest and not have to have it be sex? I had a husband, we tried to describe affection for him, and one of the words we came up with, he finally got an image, is all those things you would do as foreplay to try to seduce a woman, but to do it without trying to seduce her. To which his response is, okay, but then what would be the point? Like, well, the point, of course, would be to express your connection and express your intimacy without making it about getting laid. Some men honestly just don't get that, even explained like that. This doesn't register because of how they've been conditioned. But all of us are grown-ups, and all of us can make better decisions. And for those of us grown-ups who are also Christians, who believe in a creator God that created and designed the system and makes us have intrinsic value, and my partner has intrinsic value, and when we come together in the synergistic thing to share pleasure, to share joy, not just to give, but to share, certainly never just to take, but perhaps to receive. And as we dive into some of these ideas so we can avoid some of the problems we've seen, particularly in the church, but in society at large, and that we questers at Quest Xian can be standard bearers, that we will have the conversations, that we are willing to have real talk about real things. And this is a real thing, and it's a big thing, it's a big deal. And to have real discussions about the things that are important, to have frank discussions where you're not guessing what someone means. We're not talking around and kind of avoiding parts of the issue because it makes us a little uncomfortable. Let's just talk about it. It's an issue that can be talked about, and it's an important thing to understand. And we want good information. And you're not going to find it in pornography. But if you go looking for it online, you're going to find a whole lot of pornography. And that's going to give people a whole lot of bad information. So let's be people who can have the conversation. And then we will continue to move forward from there. Now, I don't know how many of these kind of new live sessions I'm going to do before I launch the awesome sex lessons week by week. But obviously, we've at least done this one. I might do at least one more, maybe two. We'll see how much more information I need to do. But if you would like to give me any feedback down in the comment section, especially if you have any issues you would like me to address or things to talk about for next time, that will help flesh that out. So this is Pastor Scott Conway at Quest Xian. Thank you very much for being here and sticking out what for some people is an uncomfortable topic. And for me, is an important topic to talk about. God bless.